Hello and welcome where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. Tonight, we follow Sherlock Holmes into a snow-covered London, where a mysterious locket sparks fear. A young heir vanishes into a blizzard, and secrets of loyalty and betrayal unravel in the dead of night. As footprints disappear in the snow, Holmes and Watson must navigate misdirection, hidden motives, and perilous traps to save a life and uncover the truth. Will reason prevail over deception, or will the storm bury the secrets forever? Stay close. It's a mystery you won't forget. Chapter 1. The Client in the Snow. Thus I begin, dear listeners, another account from the ever-eventful chronicles of my life with Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Those extraordinary years when I, Dr. John H. Watson, shared lodgings with the most singular consulting detective in London, if not the world. And as must often be the case with these recollections, the telling begins not with triumph nor conclusion, but with a morning gripped by winter's deepest breath. London on that particular December dawn lay blanketed beneath a fresh fall of snow, the sort that renders even familiar streets strange and theatrical. Outside the windows of 221B Baker Street, the gas lamps flickered anxiously, their glow smothered by a gauze of drifting fog. The clatter of horses' hooves against the frozen streets carried in muted rhythm, and the thin lamplight cast silhouettes of passing hansom cabs like phantoms gliding across white-dusted cobblestones. Inside, the fire crackled with earnest endeavor, fighting the cold that seeped through ill-fitted Victorian window sashes. I had stationed myself directly before the grate, palms spread toward the warmth, contemplating the rare luxury of a quiet morning. Holmes sat opposite, not lounging in the indolent fashion of the carefree, but poised in that peculiar stillness he adopted only when his mind raced at a speed imperceptible to ordinary mortals. His eyes were closed, but every line of his lean frame conveyed alertness. His fingers formed the familiar steeple beneath his chin, while curls of pipe smoke coiled like thoughtful spirits into the rafters. Our tranquility was brief. At precisely 8:15, a frantic knocking rattled the door below, so abrupt and anxious that I started, and even Holmes opened one hawk-like eye. Mrs. Hudson's startled voice floated upstairs, followed by hurried footsteps ascending. "A lady to see you, Mr. Holmes," she called, her tone betraying an uncharacteristic concern. Holmes sat forward. "A lady? In this weather? Show her in, Mrs. Hudson." Moments later, the door swung wide, revealing a figure standing against the storm-gray morning like an apparition torn from some ghostly novel. She was tall, cloaked in heavy brown furs, her hat rimmed with frost and her lashes dusted white. Snowflakes glittered upon her shoulders like fragments of sundered diamonds. The contrast between her pale, stricken features and the bleak winter behind her framed her as though she had stepped from the very heart of the storm. "Miss Eleanor Whitford," Mrs. Hudson announced softly. The lady curtsied shakily, though her trembling appeared to owe more to distress than cold. I hurried to draw a chair near the fire, guiding her toward its warmth. Holmes regarded her with his piercing gray gaze, measuring, weighing, deducing before a single word was exchanged. "Pray compose yourself, Miss Whitford," he said gently yet firmly. "You are safe here. Please tell us what misfortune has driven you out upon such a morning." She removed her gloves with trembling fingers. Instinctively, I noticed the absence of one. She possessed only a single glove, the other hand bare and reddened by the cold. "It is my brother, Mr. Holmes," she began, voice quavering. "My elder brother, Charles. He has vanished." "Vanished," Holmes repeated as though testing the weight of the word. "In what manner?" "That is precisely the horror," she exclaimed. "I cannot say. Last night he was at our family lodge in Hampstead. There was a dreadful storm. Snow everywhere, piled against the doors and windows. This morning the servants found the lodge unlocked, though not forced, and my brother gone. Only, she swallowed hard, only footprints in the snow, and even those end abruptly. Holmes's eyes sharpened. Abruptly? As if halted. As if— Miss Whitford blinked rapidly against overwhelmed nerves, as if he stepped off the earth altogether. A tremor passed through her frame. I fetched a glass of water, pressing it into her hand. She drank gratefully. Holmes rose and crossed the room with that lithe, deliberate grace which always suggested a mind several steps ahead of any situation. You say the lodge was unlocked. Did your brother often forget to secure it? Never, she answered at once. Charles was always meticulous. Holmes caught the past tense instantly. You fear the worst, she bowed her head. I do. Holmes resumed his seat. Pray continue. What else was discovered? Miss Whitford's gaze flicked nervously between us. This. From her cloak she withdrew a small paper parcel, carefully wrapped against the moisture of the storm. Inside lay a glove, deep crimson in color, so vibrant it seemed almost to bleed against the pale backdrop of the morning. Holmes extended long fingers. May I? She nodded. He examined it with meticulous interest, turning it over, measuring its size visually, leaning down to inhale the faint scent upon it. A woman's glove, he said at last, but not yours, Miss Whitford. Slightly larger, well-worn but expensive, and recently dropped in the snow. The dampness confirms that. Miss Whitford wrung her hands. It was found a few yards from the lodge entrance. It is not Charles's, and none of the servants recognized it. Mr. Holmes. What could it mean? Holmes tapped his finger against the armrest in rhythmic contemplation. A woman's glove, he mused aloud. Footprints ending abruptly. A locked lodge found unlocked. A man meticulous about securing his surroundings, failing to do so. Snowstorms are known to distort evidence, yet your account suggests intention rather than accident. He paused, eyes narrowing. Miss Whitford, what of your brother's disposition of late? Any troubles, fears, arguments? She stiffened a fraction. None that I know of. Holmes's brows arched ever so slightly. My experience with him had taught me that such a response often signals a concealed truth. Though whether she concealed it deliberately or unconsciously, he had yet to decide. And do you know, he continued evenly, of any lady who might own a glove such as this? Miss Whitford's lips parted, but no words emerged. A flicker, guilt, distress, flashed in her eyes. Holmes did not press the matter, not yet. Instead he rose, retrieving his violin bow to tap lightly against the glove as though it were an instrument capable of producing confession. Watson, he said, fetch my coat, and yours. I blinked. We are going out? At once. Miss Whitford sat bolt upright. You will come to the lodge? Certainly, Holmes replied. This matter will not reveal its truth from the comfort of Baker Street. Snow preserves secrets only briefly. Time is not our ally. I moved to the hallway where our winter garments hung, handing Holmes his heavy coat and muffler. The cold outside, though dreadful, suddenly seemed far less oppressive than the eerie mystery now unfurling. When I returned, Miss Whitford stood near the window, gazing anxiously at the swirling snow. My brother and I have lived together since childhood, she said softly, almost to herself. We have only each other. If harm has come to him, Holmes interrupted but gently. Fear not, Miss Whitford, I have known many cases where events appeared sinister yet were merely misunderstood. We will uncover the truth. His tone carried no false comfort. Holmes was not given to such things, but an analytical confidence that soothed her more effectively than any platitude could have done. A rumbling carriage passed by outside, sending up a spray of snow. Holmes glanced at it, then returned his attention to our visitor. "One last question before we depart, Miss Whitford. When precisely was your brother last seen?" "Last evening, just before the storm worsened," she replied. "Around 7. The servants delivered supper to him. He was alone." Holmes nodded slowly. "Very well. You will accompany us to Hampstead." I must," she said with conviction. "I could not remain in London while my brother's fate hangs in uncertainty." Holmes grabbed his hat. "Then let us waste no time." Within 10 minutes, the three of us were bundled into a hansom cab, weaving through the treacherous streets. The air was sharp as needles, and the world seemed muffled beneath a thick quilt of snow. I could see the urgency in Miss Whitford's posture, every jolt of the cab eliciting a small start from her. Holmes, however, remained characteristically composed, though his eyes darted from window to window, absorbing every detail. The depth of the snow, the direction of wind-blown drifts, the state of foot traffic, all seemingly trivial observations that would, I knew, soon find purpose in his deductions. "Tell me, Miss Whitford," he said after a long silence, "does your brother have any enemies?" "No," she said firmly. "Charles is kind, intelligent, and well-liked. He would never inspire harm." Holmes nodded slowly. "And is he affiliated with any business ventures of a precarious or contentious nature?" She hesitated. "None that I know of." Holmes gave me a quick sidelong glance, a private, silent acknowledgement that this refrain was becoming conspicuous. The cab crested the hill toward Hampstead. The snow deepened, the wind sharpened, and soon the path grew so treacherous that the driver dismounted to guide the horse by hand. The countryside, usually picturesque, had taken on a ghostly pallor. The trees bowed under burdens of white, their branches like skeletal arms reaching skyward. At last the Whitford family lodge emerged, a handsome stone structure 2 stories tall, its roof laden with snow. Smoke did not rise from its chimney. Miss Whitford clasped my arm. That fear haunts me. The chimney has been cold since morning. Charles always keeps a fire." Holmes stepped out of the cab, boots crunching sharply upon the snow. "Watson, take note," he murmured. I already had. The place felt profoundly empty. A constable approached, saluting stiffly. "Detective Holmes, sir. We've kept the scene untouched, as requested." "Good man," Holmes replied. "Report, if you please." "Single set of footprints leading to the lodge door," the constable said, pointing. "But none leading away. They, stop." "Stop?" Holmes repeated sharply. "Yes, sir. The snow's fresh, but we examined it thrice. The tracks simply end about 15 feet from the doorway." Miss Whitford gasped softly. Holmes strode forward to inspect. The prints were crisp, deep, clearly formed by boots heavier than a woman's, likely a man's stride. But the constable was right. 15 feet from the door, the tracks ceased, as though the person had vanished into thin air. Holmes knelt, gloved fingers brushing lightly over the snow. "Curious," he murmured. "Very curious indeed." He pulled out his magnifying glass, the familiar click sounding through the cold air. "Watson, observe the edges of these prints. Undisturbed snow lies beyond them, no drag marks, no signs of backtracking. And look here, slight compression at the final print's border. Something vertical descended. An object," I offered. "Perhaps, or a person." He stood suddenly. "The lodge interior first, then we return to this." Miss Whitford was pale but resolute. "Please, let us find him." The mystery had begun. A vanished brother, a crimson glove, footprints ending in untouched snow, and a woman whose grief seemed genuine, yet whose answers carried shadows. Holmes turned to me as we approached the lodge door. "Watson," he said quietly, "prepare yourself. Something unnatural has occurred here, and whatever it is, it began with deliberate intent. And with that, he pushed open the door and stepped inside. Chapter 2. The Vanishing Tracks. The door to the Whitford Lodge groaned against the winter's weight as Holmes pushed it inward, releasing a gust of air stale with cold and silence. I struck a match and lit a nearby oil lamp, its golden glow revealing an interior frozen not merely by temperature, but by the abruptness with which life seemed to have departed it. A great oak table dominated the main room, set as though for a solitary supper. A plate half finished, a glass of claret untouched, and a napkin folded with meticulous symmetry. These were the small domestic details a man performs without thought, yet they offered Holmes a feast of information. Miss Whitford entered cautiously, her gaze darting from the hearth to the staircase, as if expecting her brother to materialize from the shadows. Holmes paused at the dining table. "Your brother is right-handed, Miss Whitford?" "Yes." "Then he sat here." Holmes pointed to the chair slightly pushed back. "The position is consistent with a right-handed diner. And note the knife, placed neatly, handled toward the right. All quite ordinary, which makes the extraordinary all the more striking." He stepped away, scanning the floor with the intensity of a surveyor marking boundaries. I joined him, noting the faintest impression of boot marks on the rug near the door. "These are Charles Whitford's size?" Holmes asked. "Yes," Miss Whitford confirmed. "They indicate he paced," Holmes murmured. 4 steps forward, 3 steps back. Repeated many times, he was troubled, restless. I knelt. The pattern was faint but real. "Perhaps discussing something aloud," I suggested. "Practicing an argument? A letter?" Holmes nodded absently. "Indeed." And then, something occurred to bring his pacing to an abrupt end. He crossed to the window, tapping the latch with a long finger. "Locked. From the inside," Holmes said. "Just as Miss Whitford described." "And yet," I added, "the lodge door showed no sign of force, so he either left voluntarily or admitted someone willingly." Miss Whitford shivered. "Who would he admit in a snowstorm?" Holmes did not answer. Instead, he drifted toward the hearth, the most striking feature of the lodge. The fire had gone long cold, its ashes gray and brittle. He crouched down. "Watson, observe the grate." I followed his gaze. Among the ashes lay something glinting faintly in the lamplight, a fragment of metal, no larger than a fingernail. Holmes plucked it out carefully with his tweezers. Miss Whitford gasped. "Is that part of one of Charles's belongings?" Holmes shook his head. "No. Brass, possibly from a locket hinge or small case, singed slightly. Something was burned here, something metallic enough to leave a remnant." "Documents?" I offered. Holmes's eyes flickered with interest. "Or a token, jewelry, a symbol with personal significance, something your brother wished no one else to find." Miss Whitford pressed a hand to her throat. "Charles kept nothing of value here, I swear it." Holmes straightened. "I do not doubt your sincerity, Miss Whitford, but sincerity does not preclude ignorance." She winced, looking down. "Charles was private, but he would never hide dangers from me." Holmes studied her for a long moment before turning toward the staircase. "We shall search the upper floor later. Watson, accompany me outside. I wish to examine the tracks before the snowfall conceals more evidence." I threw on my coat. Miss Whitford, though trembling, insisted on following. The chill struck like a physical blow. The wind carved patterns into the snow, and the trees creaked ominously, their branches groaning under winter's oppression. Holmes strode toward the line of footprints, now faintly softened by the drifting flakes. "There," he said, pointing. "The last print." It was unmistakable, a deep, crisp boot mark, and then nothing beyond it but pristine white. Holmes circled the area slowly, almost reverently. No broken snow to the left, no disturbed drifts to the right, and no backtracking. He crouched, examining the final impression with almost surgical precision. The compression suggests his last step bore more weight than usual, as though he expected solid ground ahead, and met none. None? Miss Whitford echoed. Holmes looked up. The snow here is deeper than around the lodge, nearly 2 feet. If he stepped into soft powder, the hole should remain. Yet the snow is untouched. I felt a prickle along my spine. Holmes, what do you infer? That someone manipulated the surface after his disappearance. Not by sweeping, no broom lines, but by a softer, broader method. He scanned the tree line. A branch, perhaps. He touched a nearby pine limb. Snow cascaded off in a soft wave, leaving behind an even sheet. Just so. Miss Whitford's voice trembled. Then he was taken? Holmes did not commit. The absence of tracks does suggest assistance. Whether willing or unwilling, we cannot yet know. He turned his gaze upward. I followed and froze. Above us, on a protruding branch approximately 8 feet high, the snow had been disturbed. A rough patch of bark gleamed through. Holmes smiled faintly. There, confirmation. What does it mean? I asked. Something or someone was lifted vertically, or lifted something, a rope perhaps, a pulley, enough to raise a grown man a few feet. Why? Miss Whitford whispered. Because, Holmes said quietly, it creates the illusion of disappearance. A gust of wind scattered snow around us like flour thrown from a baker's hand. Holmes stood abruptly. Back inside, Watson. There is more to uncover. And I believe the answer lies not only in the tracks, but in the details Miss Whitford has not yet told us. Miss Whitford flinched. I have told you everything. Holmes's gaze was sharp, but not unkind. Not deliberately withheld, perhaps, but unconsciously. Yes. He gestured toward the lodge. Come. I have 2 final questions before we proceed. The warmth of the lodge felt dim and uncertain. Holmes led us to the dining table again. Miss Whitford, he said, did your brother receive correspondence recently? Letters? Notes? An unexpected visitor? Her hands twisted together. He did receive a letter yesterday afternoon. I saw him reading it. What did it concern? I do not know, she whispered, but it upset him. He left the room abruptly. Holmes nodded, unsurprised. And the glove? You recognized it immediately, did you not? A flush spread across her pale cheeks. Holmes pressed gently. Whose is it? She hesitated, then. It belongs to a woman Charles once courted. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Ah, she exhaled shakily. But she is no threat to him. They parted months ago. Mutually? Holmes asked softly. Miss Whitford's silence was answer enough. Holmes turned to me. Watson, the picture sharpens, a troubling letter, a past relationship unresolved, a man pacing in distress before disappearing in an impossible manner. And the rope lifting? I said. Part of the staging, Watson. He turned back to our client. Miss Whitford, your brother is not merely missing, he is in the midst of a crisis, personal or perhaps deeply emotional. Someone close to him has played a role. Do you mean she? Miss Whitford gasped. Holmes raised a hand. Not necessarily, but the crimson glove placed in the snow? That was no accident. It was a message, or a lure. He extinguished the lamp flame with a decisive motion. Chapter 3. The Locked Lodge. The lodge's heavy door groaned shut behind us, muffling the wind to a distant lament. Holmes paused in the entryway, surveying the dim interior as one might examine a crime scene preserved behind glass. The air within was unnaturally still, suspended between cold and silence, an emptiness thick enough that even the flame of my lamp seemed reluctant to intrude. Miss Whitford stood rigid beside the hearth. eyes fixed upon the room as though it might suddenly yield her missing brother simply by being stared at intensely enough. Holmes motioned for her to sit. "Rest a moment, Miss Whitford. Fatigue clouds recollection." She obeyed, though reluctantly, folding her gloved hands in her lap. Holmes turned to me. "Watson, begin with the upper-level rooms. Examine them systematically. I shall follow shortly." "Of course," I said, taking my lamp and ascending the staircase. The second floor of the lodge was a narrow gallery of bedrooms, each door standing ajar. I entered the first on the left. A modest chamber, single bed, bureau, small writing desk. No signs of struggle, no overturned furniture. The bed's coverlet was crisp and untouched. The hearth here, too, was cold, the ashes gray. The next room yielded much the same. But the third room held something of interest. A small round table by the window bore faint circular marks, the impression of a cup or glass recently placed there. The window itself was locked from the inside, yet the frost upon its glass was uneven, more melted than in the other rooms. Someone had stood here recently, breathing against the cold pane. I bent closer. A faint smudge, fingerprint perhaps, marked the lower corner of the glass. Too indistinct to identify, but proof of presence nonetheless. "Holmes will want to see this," I muttered. Before I could investigate further, I heard footsteps ascending behind me. Holmes appeared, moving with quick, noiseless precision. "Well?" he asked. "I found nothing unusual until this." I gestured toward the window. Holmes approached and examined the smudged pane with immediate interest. A human presence, recent enough that the heat of breath altered the frost. He then knelt to inspect the table's markings. A glass, possibly two. He tapped one ring lightly. The inner ring is faint, the outer is deeper, meaning the second object was heavier. A mug, perhaps, or something metallic. "This chamber was occupied last night?" Holmes nodded. "Or visited. But here is the curiosity. If Charles Whitford was pacing downstairs in agitation before disappearing, what was he doing in this room? And with whom?" "You suspect he wasn't alone?" I asked. Holmes gave a faint, humorless smile. "Watson, in all my years, I have never seen a man vanish alone." He straightened abruptly, his attention caught by something near the bedpost. "Look here." A strand of fabric, thin and pale, clung to a splinter of wood. I plucked it free. "A thread from a sleeve?" Holmes rolled it between his fingers. "Cotton, white, torn, not cut. Someone moved quickly, snagging their garment, and the height," he gestured, "suggests a woman unless a man crouched or fell." "And since Charles lived alone," I said, "a visitor is almost certain." Holmes's eyes flickered knowingly. "And we already know of one woman connected to this case." "His former companion," I murmured. "Just so." Holmes pocketed the thread. "Let us return downstairs. The room offers clues, but the heart of the mystery beats below." Miss Whitford rose at our return, her expression tense. "Did you find anything?" Holmes avoided the specifics for now. "Enough to confirm that your brother was not alone last night." Her face drained of color. "Not alone? With whom?" "That, Miss Whitford," Holmes replied, "is what we shall discover." He returned to the dining table and leaned over the remains of the interrupted supper. "Observe, Watson. The plate is half finished, fork laid gently upon its rim. Not the sign of a man startled or forced to flee. He left the table deliberately." "You think he rose of his own will?" I asked. "Yes, but he carried agitation with him." Holmes gestured toward the soft depressions on the rug. "His pacing indicates distress. Something, perhaps that letter you mentioned, deeply troubled him." Miss Whitford clasped the arm of the chair. "Then what of the unlocked door?" Holmes moved toward it, running a long finger along the brass handle, then the lock. There is no splintering, no tool marks. Your brother opened it himself. Under compulsion? She whispered. Possibly, or at a summons. Holmes paused. But note the detail that defies such assumptions. He pointed to a coat stand near the door. Charles Whitford's heavy winter coat still hung there. A man does not leave willingly into a snowstorm without his coat, Holmes said. Not unless he believed he would return momentarily or not travel far. Miss Whitford pressed her hand to her mouth. Perhaps someone called him outside. Holmes said nothing. He approached the hearth again and knelt. With deliberate care, he sifted the ashes further, revealing a second metallic fragment, smaller but unmistakably part of the same object as the first. A locket or case, Holmes repeated thoughtfully. Burned in haste. A sentimental object, perhaps. And the person who burned it, I asked. Either Charles, Holmes said, or someone wishing to erase a connection between him and another. Miss Whitford trembled. Are you suggesting my brother destroyed something belonging to the woman he once courted? Holmes's eyes remained fixed on the ashes. I am suggesting only that the burned object mattered deeply to someone present. He stood, brushing gray dust from his fingertips. And now, he said, we examine the room for what is absent. I frowned. Absent? Holmes gestured broadly. A man's outdoor boots are gone, but the coat remains, his hat is on the stand, gloves present, but no lantern. A lantern? Miss Whitford repeated. Holmes nodded. Your brother would not step into the night without one. Therefore, someone else provided light. I stepped back, surveying the lodge anew. Holmes, this was staged. Precisely. His eyes gleamed. The glove in the snow, the footprints ending, the burned locket, each is a piece in a carefully composed tableau. Miss Whitford's voice was small. But for what purpose? Holmes approached her gently. To mislead. To direct your suspicions toward one person while concealing the actions of another. She trembled. I do not understand. Holmes regarded her with quiet intensity. You will, he said. But before clarity comes, we must prepare ourselves for the possibility that your brother, far from being abducted, may have orchestrated part of this deception himself. Her breath caught. Holmes, do you truly believe he staged his own disappearance? Holmes folded his arms. I believe Charles Whitford was desperate. I believe he destroyed something that frightened or tormented him. And I believe he met someone in this lodge last night. Someone he trusted too much or feared too little. He turned to me. Watson, the footprints outside tell part of the story, but the locked lodge tells the rest. He lifted the brass fragments. These ashes, he said softly, are the key. Until we know what was burned and by whom, we will remain blind. He swept his coat around him. To the caretaker, he said. He was the last to see your brother alive. Miss Whitford rose shakily. You think he knows something? Holmes's eyes sharpened. I think he knows more than he realizes, and perhaps, he added, more than he wishes to say. Chapter 4. The Caretaker's Secret Approx. 1,000 words. We departed the snow-covered lodge with Miss Whitford between us, her steps faltering upon the icy path. The wind bit sharply at our cheeks, and the lantern Holmes carried bobbed like a lone golden eye in the gloom. The caretaker's residence lay a short distance from the lodge, a squat stone building half submerged in drifts. Holmes walked briskly, chin tucked against his scarf, his mind clearly racing far ahead of our feet. I recognized the signs. The quickened pace, the narrowed gaze, the low murmur of possibilities being sorted and discarded internally. Something in the lodge had stirred the gears of his mind into restless motion. Miss Whitford, by contrast, moved with the stiffness of dread. Twice she asked if we truly believed the caretaker might hold the solution to her brother's disappearance. Twice Holmes responded with the same gentle, calculated ambiguity. "My dear Miss Whitford," he said, "I believe the caretaker was a witness to something. Whether he understood what he witnessed is another matter entirely." She said nothing further. A thin stream of smoke curled from the cottage's chimney, visible only when our lantern's glow brushed it. Holmes knocked sharply upon the wooden door. After a pause, a gruff voice called out, "Who's there at this hour?" Holmes replied, "Visitors seeking information. Open the door, Mr. Hargreaves." A moment later, the door cracked open, revealing the weathered, lantern-lit face of an older man with a stooped build and distrustful eyes. "Mr. Holmes? Dr. Watson," he grunted. "Miss Whitford?" His gaze lingered on her with something bordering on unease. "May we come in?" Holmes asked. The caretaker hesitated, then stepped aside with a muttered, "Very well, though I've said all I know already." Holmes entered first, scanning the room with a casualness I knew to be entirely deceptive. The modest interior consisted of a single chamber, hearth, table, narrow bed, shelves filled with tools and ledgers. But it was exceptionally tidy. Too tidy for a man who lived alone. "Please sit," Hargreaves said gruffly, motioning toward the table. Miss Whitford and I took seats while Holmes remained standing, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed not on the caretaker but on the long-handled snow shovel leaning near the door. "Mr. Hargreaves," Holmes began mildly, "we understand you were the last to see Mr. Charles Whitford." The caretaker nodded stiffly. "I brought him his provisions late in the afternoon. He took them, shut the door, and that was that." "You saw no one else near the lodge?" Holmes asked. "No one. It was snowing heavily. Haven't seen a soul all week." Holmes tilted his head. "Strange. Very strange indeed." Hargreaves frowned. "What's strange about that?" "That the snow obscured all approach," Holmes said, "and yet someone reached the lodge last night." The caretaker stiffened. "What do you mean?" Holmes's expression sharpened with quiet intensity. "A visitor entered the lodge, someone your master was expecting. Someone who left no trace, at least none visible to the untrained eye." Hargreaves swallowed. I don't know anything about that." Holmes stepped forward just slightly, his voice soft but unyielding. "Mr. Hargreaves, you are a poor liar." Silence filled the cottage, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Miss Whitford flinched. "Mr. Hargreaves, please. My brother, did you see him after sunset?" The caretaker's eyes darted to her, then to the floor. "I didn't see him," he muttered. "But you heard something," Holmes said immediately. Hargreaves closed his eyes briefly, defeated. "Aye," he whispered. "I heard voices." At Holmes's urging, the caretaker spoke in halting, reluctant detail. "It was late, nearly 10. I was shutting in for the night when I heard someone shouting from the direction of the lodge. Couldn't make out the words, just the tone. A quarrel, fierce-like." "And the voices?" Holmes asked. "One was Mr. Charles's. The other—" Hargreaves hesitated. "The other was a woman's." Miss Whitford gasped softly. Holmes, however, did not move. "A woman. Describe the voice." "Sharp, upset, maybe angry." Holmes nodded, unsurprised. "And what happened next?" "I stepped outside to listen better, but the wind was howling so hard I couldn't make sense of anything. By the time I'd crossed half the distance to the lodge, the shouting stopped. The door slammed. Lights went out. All quiet." "And you did not investigate further?" Holmes pressed. "I thought they'd settled it. Didn't seem my place to interfere." Holmes's smile was faint and cutting. "Convenient." Hargreaves bristled. "Now see here." But Holmes cut across him. "There is more. What else did you notice?" The caretaker's eyes wavered as if torn between fear and duty. Then he exhaled heavily. I saw lanterns glow moving through the trees, but only one lantern, and it was heading away from the lodge. Holmes's eyes flickered with triumph. Of course, Miss Whitford's voice trembled. But if the lantern belonged to the woman, did she take Charles with her? No, Holmes said crisply. Because Charles's boots are missing from the lodge. He left with someone but not wearing his coat or taking a lantern of his own. But why? I asked. Holmes turned toward me. Because he believed the person he followed intended no harm, and because he expected to return immediately. Miss Whitford paled. Then something must have gone wrong. Holmes nodded solemnly. Something went very wrong indeed. He faced the caretaker again. The woman who visited him, did you recognize her voice? Hargreaves shifted uncomfortably. Maybe. Holmes's eyes gleamed. You did? I'm not sure. You are. Hargreaves' shoulders sagged under the weight of Holmes's absolute certainty. All right, I think it was Miss Fairchild. Miss Whitford's hand flew to her mouth. Charles's former fiancée? I breathed. Hargreaves nodded. I've heard her speak before when she used to visit last winter. Holmes inclined his head. And yet you told no one. I didn't want trouble, Hargreaves muttered. And she sounded desperate. Holmes leaned over the table, palms braced, his gaze bearing upon the caretaker with surgical precision. Mr. Hargreaves, you have withheld crucial evidence. You have misled investigators, and you have stood idle while this young woman feared the worst for her brother. The caretaker met his gaze miserably. I'm sorry. Truly. Holmes's voice softened, but only barely. You are sorry because you are frightened, not because you are remorseful. He straightened. Nevertheless, your information is invaluable. A quarrel, a woman's voice, a departing lantern. Holmes paced once, twice. And the burned object in the hearth. Burned? Hargreaves echoed nervously. Holmes shot him a sharp look. You knew of it? I saw smoke from the chimney after the shouting stopped. Holmes snapped his fingers once sharply. The motive, he murmured, is becoming clearer. Whatever Charles burned, Miss Fairchild likely brought it. Miss Whitford shuddered. Holmes, what could she have wanted? Holmes paused, his profile half lit by fire and lantern. That, he said, is our next question. He turned to Hargreaves. Prepare yourself, Mr. Hargreaves. You will accompany us back to the lodge at dawn. The truth demands your presence. The caretaker nodded helplessly. Holmes opened the cottage door, letting in a gust of frigid wind. Come, Watson, Miss Whitford. We have enough now to confront Miss Fairchild. But it is nearly midnight, I protested. Holmes smiled grimly. A woman who walks through a blizzard to visit a man she once loved will not be asleep tonight. He stepped into the storm. And somewhere in that woman's heart, he added, lies the key to Charles Whitford's fate. Chapter 5. The Woman in the Snow. The storm had not relented. Indeed, as we pressed onward toward the village, the wind seemed to rise in renewed fury as though offended by our persistence. Snowflakes drove against us in sharp, needling bursts, and our lantern's glow scarcely penetrated more than a few paces ahead. Miss Whitford clutched her cloak tightly around her, yet moved with admirable resolve. Holmes, however, strode with quick, restless steps, his lean figure cutting a purposeful silhouette through the swirling white. I recognized that peculiar energy in him, the sharp intensity that seized him when he sensed himself close to the heart of a riddle. It made him entirely impervious to cold, fatigue, or hunger. We reached the village after nearly half an hour of trudging through knee-high drifts. A few dim lamps burned behind frosted window panes, but the streets themselves were deserted. A single constable stood near the station's entrance, stamping warmth into his boots. Holmes approached him immediately. "Constable Avery," he called. The man started. "Mr. Holmes, out in this storm?" "The weather is no obstacle to necessity," Holmes replied. "We seek a Miss Eleanor Fairchild. Has she been seen tonight?" The constable rubbed his red nose. "Miss Fairchild? Yes, sir. She returned to her aunt's house not an hour ago. Looked in a terrible state, too, snow-covered, shaken. I asked if she needed assistance, but she brushed past." Holmes exchanged a significant glance with me. "Point us to the house." The constable gestured toward a row of narrow dwellings. "4 doors down, lights still on." Holmes nodded and turned to Miss Whitford. "Prepare yourself. What you hear may not be pleasant." She gave a small, trembling nod. "I only want the truth, Mr. Holmes, whatever it is." We made our way to the indicated house, its windows glowing faintly through lace curtains. Holmes knocked firmly. After a long moment, the door opened. A thin, severe-looking woman with tightly pinned hair peered out at us. "Yes?" Holmes removed his hat. "Pardon the intrusion, madam. We seek Miss Eleanor Fairchild." The woman's expression tightened. "She is indisposed." "Then it is all the more urgent that we speak with her," Holmes said. "A man's life may depend upon it." The woman hesitated, clearly torn between duty to her niece and desire to avoid scandal. At last, she stepped aside. "She is in the sitting room," she said quietly. "But I beg you, be gentle. She came home distraught." We entered the house, its warmth immediately enveloping us, carrying the scent of burning coal and lavender polish. Miss Fairchild sat by the fireplace, wrapped in a blanket. Her dark hair, still damp from the snow, clung to her temples. She looked up with a start when she saw us. "Dr. Watson," she murmured. "Miss Whitford?" And then her eyes landed on Holmes, and the color drained from her face. "You," she whispered. "I had a feeling you might come." Holmes stepped forward, his voice low and controlled. "Miss Fairchild, we require an account of your visit to Mr. Charles Whitford last night." She flinched as though struck. "I told no one. No one knew I went." "On the contrary," Holmes said gently. "Your path was not as invisible as you imagined." She closed her eyes for a moment, then spoke in a trembling voice. "I only wanted to speak with him, to return something that belonged to him." Holmes leaned slightly forward. "The locket," her breath caught. "You found it?" "Fragments of it," Holmes replied, "burned in the hearth." Miss Fairchild buried her face in her hands. Miss Whitford's lips parted in shock. "He burned it?" Miss Fairchild whispered. Holmes's tone softened slightly. "Tell us everything, Miss Fairchild, from the beginning." She drew a shaky breath. "I received a letter from Charles 3 days ago, a short one but pleading. He said we must meet, that he had been keeping something from me, something that tormented him. He asked me to come to the lodge at night when no one would notice." Miss Whitford gasped. "Why would he write you?" "He felt he owed me the truth," she said quietly. "Though we ended our relationship, we parted, imperfectly." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "The truth about what?" Miss Fairchild shuddered. "About the locket. It was mine, or rather a gift from Charles. I returned it to him when we broke our engagement. But he wrote that he had discovered something hidden within it." Holmes exchanged a quick glance with me. This was the missing piece he had suspected. "What was inside?" he asked. "A folded scrap of paper," she whispered. "A message I never placed there, I swear it." Miss Whitford leaned forward. "What did it say?" "It said, 'You are being watched.'" The room fell utterly silent. Holmes absorbed her words with intense concentration. "Who wrote the message?" "I don't know," she said desperately. "But Charles said he recognized the handwriting." He would not tell me whose, only that the revelation terrified him. And this fear, Holmes pressed, was the reason for last night's meeting? She nodded. I went to the lodge. Charles was pacing, incoherent. He said the message proved he had been deceived, conspired against. He begged me to take the locket back to keep it safe. He said he must leave the lodge, that danger was close. Holmes's voice sharpened. Danger from whom? Miss Fairchild shook her head helplessly. He would not say. I pressed him, but he grew frantic. We argued. I raised my voice, and then he suddenly insisted I leave at once. Did he go with you? I asked. No. He said he needed to fetch some papers hidden upstairs, proof of the conspiracy. He told me to walk ahead toward the woods and that he would meet me within minutes. Miss Whitford gasped. But he never came. Tears filled Miss Fairchild's eyes. I waited more than half an hour. Then the wind grew so severe that I feared for my safety. I returned home at once. Holmes regarded her in silence for a long moment. And why, he asked finally, did Charles burn the locket? She drew a shaky breath. He told me. He said the danger was connected to whatever was hidden inside. He feared it was marked. He believed destroying it might give him a few hours' safety. Holmes's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a quiet confirmation of a theory forming in his mind. Miss Fairchild looked between us with anguish. Mr. Holmes, Charles is not dead, is he? You do not believe that? Holmes inhaled slowly, then spoke with decisive clarity. I believe, he said, that Charles Whitford discovered something someone desperately wanted concealed. Someone who watched him. Someone who followed him. And someone who ensured he never reached the woods last night. Miss Whitford let out a broken whisper. Then he was taken. Holmes met her gaze steadily. Yes, and if we do not act swiftly, he may yet be in grave peril. The fire crackled sharply in the silence that followed. Holmes turned toward me with sudden resolve. Watson, fetch your coat. We return to the lodge at once. There is a truth hidden there that I missed. He turned to Miss Whitford and Miss Fairchild. And tonight, he said quietly, that truth will not escape me. Chapter 6. Footprints of the Vanished. We left Miss Fairchild's house with the storm still raging, though now the wind seemed almost purposeful, like a great invisible hand urging us back toward the lodge with unspoken urgency. Holmes pressed forward so swiftly that Miss Whitford and I could scarcely keep pace. His lantern bobbed in quick rhythmic motions ahead, a lone beacon in the blank whirl of white. Holmes, I called over the wind, you said there is something at the lodge you missed. What are we returning to find? Holmes did not slow. Not to find, Watson, merely to confirm. A suspicion demands verification. A suspicion of what? He gave a thin smile that vanished as quickly as it came. Of how Charles Whitford left the lodge, and with whom. Miss Whitford hurried beside him. Do you think my brother is still alive? Holmes did not answer immediately. The snow swallowed 3 of his breaths before he spoke. I believe he was alive when he stepped into the night, he said at last. Whether he remains so depends upon how swiftly we act. Miss Whitford clutched her cloak tighter, but her chin lifted in courage. She said nothing more until we reached the path leading back to Whitford Lodge. The building loomed out of the blizzard like a dark sentry. Our lantern light struck its windows, faint reflections glimmering as though eyes watched from within. Holmes stopped abruptly. Watson, your lamp. Hold it low. I obeyed, lowering my lamp until its glow brushed the snow-covered ground. Holmes crouched. What do you see? I asked. He smiled without mirth. Precisely what I suspected. He motioned for Miss Whitford to stand near the steps while he brushed aside a layer of snow with his glove, revealing several deeply set impressions beneath. "Footprints," he said. "But we examined the grounds earlier," I reminded him. "There were only Charles's tracks leading away." "Because, Watson," Holmes said, "we were searching in the wrong direction." He cleared more snow, uncovering a second partial track, this one smaller. "A woman's footprint," Miss Whitford whispered. "Indeed," Holmes murmured. "Miss Fairchild's returning to the lodge." "But she claimed she approached through the woods," I said. "She told the truth," Holmes replied. "She did approach by the woods, but she left by the path." I blinked. "Why?" Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he rose and faced the door of the lodge. "Because she fled," he said finally. "She left in fear and in haste." Miss Whitford clasped her hands. "Fear of what?" Holmes's eyes swept the dark tree line. "Not what, Miss Whitford, whom?" Without further explanation, he ascended the steps and pushed open the lodge door. The interior greeted us with the same stillness as before, though now the silence carried a foreboding weight. Holmes's eyes darted instantly to the hearth. "Watson, poke through the ashes again." I did so, though I believed we had exhausted every scrap earlier. Yet now, in the deeper recess beneath the burnt fragments of the locket, I found something new. A thin strip of metal bent like a clipped hinge. Holmes snatched it gently from my palm. "Just as I thought," he whispered. "What is it?" Miss Whitford asked faintly. "A clasp," Holmes replied, "but not from the locket. This is from a small case, one that would hold letters or documents." "His papers," Miss Whitford breathed. "Miss Fairchild said he was retrieving papers when he told her to flee." "Exactly," Holmes said. "He carried them downstairs, and then someone arrived." He turned abruptly to the entryway. "Watson, the snow will have covered it by now, but earlier I noticed something peculiar about the threshold." I brought the lamp. Holmes stooped and traced his finger along the wood. "Look closely." I saw it at once. A thin smear of mud, just a trace, barely perceptible on the dark wood. "Someone entered after Miss Fairchild left," Holmes said quietly. "Someone who did not trouble to remove all signs of their presence." Miss Whitford gasped. "Then, my brother did not vanish into the storm alone." "No," Holmes replied. "He left under compulsion or coercion." He rose swiftly, pacing the length of the room. "Whoever entered confronted Charles over the documents. A struggle is unlikely, or we would see disorder. Instead, Charles went willingly, or reluctantly, but without violence." "How can you be sure?" I asked. Holmes pointed to the coat stand. "His coat remains, but—" He strode to the table. "The candle atop this desk has been moved." I examined it. "Holmes, that is hardly proof." "Oh, Watson, do open your eyes. The melted wax has run down the right side, though the wick bends left. The candle was moved after being lit. And that means that someone searched this desk by candlelight, someone who did not wish to rouse suspicion by using a lantern." Miss Whitford's voice trembled. "But why search the desk?" Holmes tapped the hinge fragment in his hand. "For the very documents Charles intended to flee with." He swept the candle aside, revealing a faint indentation on the wood. "A rectangular imprint," he murmured. "The case lay here, but it is gone now." "So the intruder took it," I said. Holmes nodded. "And Charles with it." Miss Whitford sank into a nearby chair. "But who? Who would wish to harm my brother?" Holmes turned to her with grave deliberation. "It is not harm they sought," he said. "It is silence." A gust of wind rattled the shutters violently. Holmes moved toward the window and peered out into the blizzard. "Watson," he said quietly. "The intruder approached the lodge from the woods, the same route Miss Fairchild used. But unlike her, he remained hidden until she was gone." You believe he followed her? I asked. Holmes's jaw tightened. He followed both of them. Miss Fairchild was being watched. The message in the locket was no lie, and Charles, by extension, was under surveillance. Miss Whitford clasped her hands over her heart. Then my brother was targeted. Holmes nodded once. Targeted, and taken by someone skilled enough to erase their trail. A professional? I asked. Certainly, but not necessarily a stranger. Holmes turned once more to the small window overlooking the woods. Someone familiar with the Whitford family. Someone Charles recognized, trusted enough to step outside with. A deep silence fell. Finally, Miss Whitford whispered, "Holmes." Who could that be? Holmes's eyes gleamed with sudden, sharp certainty. "That," he said, "is what we shall discover tonight, but first." He extinguished the lantern. "We return to the caretaker, for there is something he has not yet told us." As darkness closed around us and the storm roared anew, I felt the unmistakable sense that we stood on the edge of the truth, one step away from a revelation Holmes had already glimpsed but not yet spoken. And whatever awaited us in the night, Holmes moved toward it with a singular purpose. Chapter 7. The Caretaker's Confession. We fought our way back through the storm, though now it felt less like a blind trial against the elements and more like a march toward a looming revelation. Holmes walked ahead in tense silence, Miss Whitford at his side, and I just behind them, lantern held aloft. The snow was falling heavier than ever. Thick, swirling sheets that swallowed sound and devoured our footprints as quickly as they were made. The caretaker's cottage loomed out of the white murk, a hunched shape barely distinguishable from the drifts surrounding it. Glow seeped weakly through the shutters. Hargreaves was awake. Holmes stopped outside the door, turning sharply to us. "Remain quiet until I address him," he instructed. "We must not alarm him. He is already half terrified." Miss Whitford swallowed. "You believe he knows more than he said?" Holmes's eyes were flinty. "I believe he knows exactly whom Charles left with," and fear stayed his tongue. He knocked firmly. The door creaked open after a moment. Hargreaves stood in the threshold, hunched and pale as though expecting phantoms rather than living faces. "Back again, Mr. Holmes," he muttered. Holmes stepped past him without waiting for an invitation. "Mr. Hargreaves," he said calmly, "let us end this deception at once." The caretaker blanched. "I told you everything." Holmes held up a hand. "No. You told us what you felt safe saying, but fear of reprisal has tied your tongue." Hargreaves's lips tightened. Holmes approached him slowly, his voice softening. "You are not a wicked man, Mr. Hargreaves, but you have been placed in a position no honest man should face. Loyalty on one side, justice on the other. Yet justice must prevail now, or Charles Whitford may perish." Miss Whitford took a step forward. "Mr. Hargreaves, please, my brother's life." Her voice broke. The caretaker's face twisted with guilt. He sank heavily into his chair, burying his hands in his rough hair. "I never meant any harm," he whispered. "Never." Holmes crouched before him, speaking gently but firmly. "Then tell us the truth." Silence stretched painfully before Hargreaves finally spoke. "After Miss Fairchild left," he said hoarsely, "I heard another voice. A man's. Came from the lodge." Miss Whitford gasped softly. Holmes nodded once, unsurprised. "Go on." I recognized it," the caretaker murmured. "But I hoped I was mistaken." "And now?" Holmes asked. He shook his head slowly. "I know I wasn't." Holmes leaned in. "Whose voice did you hear?" Hargreaves shut his eyes tight. When he spoke, it came out as a strained rasp. "Mr. Albert Coldwell." A chill sharper than the winter wind rushed through the room. Miss Whitford clutched the back of the chair for support. My uncle? She whispered. But why would he be at the lodge? Why would he? Holmes rose, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. Take courage, Miss Whitford. Truth often wounds before it heals. She trembled. But Uncle Albert adored my brother. He has been family to us since father died. He would never... The caretaker's voice interrupted, low and miserable. He's been visiting the lodge these past weeks, miss. Secret-like. Said it was family business, told me not to mention it. Holmes's face hardened. And you obeyed. Hargreaves looked down. He's a Whitford. I thought it was private affairs. Holmes gestured sharply. What happened last night? The caretaker licked his lips, staring at the floorboards. After the woman left, I saw another lantern in the woods. Moving slow, quiet-like. I followed a bit, saw Mr. Coldwell come from the trees. Miss Whitford's breath hitched violently. He entered the lodge, Hargreaves continued. I heard him talking to Mr. Charles. Not angry, no, calm. Too calm. Like he was trying to convince him of something. Holmes's eyes glinted. And Charles went with him? Hargreaves nodded helplessly. Aye. I saw them walk out together. Mr. Charles didn't have his coat on. Looked troubled, scared. And you didn't intervene? Holmes asked sharply. The caretaker flinched. What was I to do? He's the young master, and Mr. Coldwell, he's always been respectable. Thought maybe it was a family matter. Holmes stepped away, pacing once, twice, the full length of the room. His mind was moving at a speed almost visible in his expression. Holmes, I said, that means Charles was compelled by someone he trusted. Precisely, Holmes replied. Miss Whitford's eyes brimmed. But why? Why would Uncle Albert deceive him? Holmes stopped before the fire, his profile sharp in the orange glow. That, he said quietly, is the question upon which everything now hangs. He turned abruptly to Hargreaves. Did they return to the woods? Aye, the caretaker whispered, toward the northern path. Holmes exhaled sharply. Then we must follow it. Miss Whitford gasped. Tonight, in this storm? Holmes turned to her with solemn conviction. Your brother's captor is moving swiftly. We cannot afford delay. He grabbed his coat. Watson, lantern. I obeyed at once. Miss Whitford followed us to the door, her voice trembling. If Uncle Albert means my brother harm, then I cannot imagine it. I cannot believe it. Holmes placed a gentle hand on her arm. Faith in those we love blinds us, Miss Whitford. It is not your failing. But tonight, truth must be seen with clear eyes. She swallowed painfully. What must I do? Remain here, Holmes said firmly. You are in no condition to face what lies ahead, and Mr. Hargreaves will remain with you. The caretaker nodded tearfully. Holmes stepped into the storm, and I followed. The wind roared like a living thing, trees bent under its weight. Our lantern's flame sputtered, fighting to survive. Holmes set a relentless pace toward the northern trail. Holmes, I shouted over the wind. Do you believe Coldwell is the one behind the message in the locket? I believe, Holmes answered sharply, that Coldwell has been orchestrating events for weeks, perhaps months. The message, the surveillance, the fear that consumed Charles, all pieces of a design. And Charles discovered the truth. Holmes's face was grim. Yes, and so Charles became a liability. My breath froze. We must find them before morning, Watson, he said, or this storm may bury more than footprints. As we plunged deeper into the woods, lantern light flickering against the dark trunks, I felt the dreadful certainty that Holmes's fear was justified, and that somewhere ahead of us, beneath the thunder of the wind, another lantern moved through the night. Chapter 8. Tracks Beneath the Snow. The snow lay deep upon the northern trail, smoothing every roughness of the earth into an unbroken sheet of white. Only the faintest depressions remained, shallow, half-obliterated yet unmistakably footprints. Holmes bent low, the lantern trembling in my grasp as I held it over his shoulder. "Here," he murmured, brushing away loose snow with a gloved hand. Two sets of tracks moving together. One lighter, Charles. One heavier, more deliberate, Coldwell. "Could they belong to anyone else?" I asked. Holmes shook his head. "No. Coldwell walks with his weight forward, a consequence of an old injury to his left hip. See here, every third step presses deeper." I marveled at how even the storm could not hide such signs from him. Holmes straightened, drawing his scarf tighter. "These tracks are no more than an hour ahead of us, perhaps less. The storm has done its best to conceal them, but it has not succeeded entirely." "Then they cannot be far," I said. "No," he agreed, "and that may prove both a blessing and a curse." We pressed forward, the wind cutting at our faces like a storm of needles. Branches heavy with snow bowed overhead, their limbs creaking under the weight. The path wound through a thicket of twisted oaks, the lantern light casting long skeletal shadows on the snow. Holmes paused abruptly. "What is it?" I whispered. He pointed. "A disturbance. See how the snow dips? Something was dragged across this place." I knelt beside him. "Dragged? You believe Charles?" "Collapsed." Holmes shook his head with grim certainty. "No. Forced off the path." The depression in the snow continued several yards, leading toward a darker patch deeper in the woods. Holmes followed the line with his eyes. "The direction is deliberate. Coldwell took him into the thicket to avoid open ground." I swallowed. "Holmes, what do you suppose he intends?" Holmes's mouth tightened. "Something that cannot stand witness." The wind moaned through the trees as if mourning. Holmes rose swiftly. "We must move. The boy may yet be alive." The thicket grew denser as we advanced, branches snagging our coats, snow falling in clumps from above. The tracks became harder to follow, but Holmes's gaze remained sharp, darting from tree roots to patches of disturbed frost. "Watson, look here." He knelt beside a fallen log. Beneath it, half buried in fresh snow, lay a dark stain. Blood. I felt a shiver that had little to do with the cold. "Recent," Holmes said quietly, "still visible despite the snowfall." "God preserve him," I murmured. Holmes examined the ground. "Not a death wound, I think. More likely a blow, an attempt to subdue him. Coldwell needs him alive, at least for now." "What for?" I asked. Holmes rose slowly, lantern light casting shadows across his keen features. "A man like Coldwell does not abduct out of passion or madness. He is, by all accounts, a man governed by calculation. If he has taken Charles, it is for leverage or silence." Holmes suddenly froze. "Do you hear that?" I held my breath. Through the howl of the storm came a faint sound, a metallic clink, rhythmic and steady like a chain swaying in the wind. Holmes motioned for silence and led the way toward the noise. Every step was a trial, the snow swallowing our boots, the cold biting through wool and leather. Yet the sound grew clearer, drawing us onward. We emerged into a small clearing. A solitary lantern hung from a low branch, swaying gently. Holmes approached cautiously. "Telltale," he murmured. "Coldwell left this to see his own return path." The light cast a pale glow on the clearing, revealing trampled snow, broken twigs, and just beyond its reach, another trail leading northward. Holmes examined the ground. "He was here no more than 20 minutes ago." "And Charles?" I asked. Holmes pointed to a separate track, smaller, staggered. "Still with him?" We pressed forward again, following the new trail. The storm raged around us, yet somehow the trees grew taller and denser, as though closing in on our pursuit. At last we reached a ridge overlooking a shallow ravine. Holmes raised the lantern and drew a sharp breath. Below, half hidden by swirling snow, stood an abandoned stone structure. Its roof half collapsed, its doorway gaping like the mouth of some ancient creature. "What is that place?" I asked. "A hunter's shelter," Holmes replied. "Long unused, a perfect spot for a clandestine meeting or imprisonment." "Holmes, look!" A faint yellow glow escaped the cracks around the warped wooden door. A light inside. "Coldwell," Holmes whispered. "We have reached him." He placed a hand on my arm. "Watson, you must be prepared for whatever lies within. Coldwell may be cornered, and a cornered man is often the most dangerous." We descended the slope cautiously, keeping to the trees until we stood only yards from the structure. Holmes extinguished the lantern, plunging us into darkness save for the dim glow leaking from the building. Holmes leaned close. "You will go around to the back. If there is a secondary exit, and there often is, you must block it." "Understood." "Do not confront him alone unless forced to." I clasped his shoulder. "And you, Holmes, be wary." He gave a faint smile. "I dare say I shall manage." We separated, Holmes moving toward the front while I circled the ravine's edge. Snow blinded me, but the glow guided my path. At the rear of the shelter I found what Holmes predicted, a narrow gap in the stone wall wide enough for a desperate man to slip through. I positioned myself there, pistol drawn. Then I heard voices. Holmes's voice, calm, measured, and another, Coldwell's, low and strained. I edged forward, careful not to reveal myself. Holmes spoke first. "It is over, Coldwell. Surrender now and let the boy go." Coldwell's reply came trembling with a mix of fear and fury. "You do not understand, Holmes. You know nothing of what you meddle with." Holmes's voice sharpened. "I know Charles discovered something you wish to remain hidden. Something worth abducting him for." A pause. Then a broken, desperate whisper from a third voice. "Holmes, is that you?" Charles. Alive. My heart pounded. Holmes spoke softly. "Courage, lad. You shall be free momentarily." Coldwell's voice rose, panicked. "Stay back, Holmes. I swear I will." A sudden crash. A struggle. I raised my pistol, ready to rush in. But Holmes's command rang through the storm. "Watson! Now!" I charged toward the doorway as the chapter and the confrontation reached its precipice. Chapter 9. The unmasking of motive. Holmes's cry, sharp, commanding, spurred me into motion. I rushed through the swirling snow and into the dilapidated stone shelter. The lantern within cast jittering shadows across the rough walls, illuminating a scene of desperate conflict. Holmes and Albert Coldwell grappled near the center of the room, their silhouettes thrown wildly onto the stone. Coldwell clutched something in his hand, something metallic that glinted in the lantern light. A revolver. Charles Whitford sat bound to a wooden beam at the far wall, pale and trembling. At the sight of me, he gasped out, "Dr. Holmes, look out!" Coldwell wrenched free of Holmes's grasp, staggering back with the revolver raised. "Stand away, both of you," he cried. "I will not be ruined for this, not after everything I have done for them, for all of them." Holmes stepped between Coldwell and the boy, hands lifted in calm appeal. "No one wishes your ruin, Coldwell, only your honesty." "My honesty?" Coldwell spat, voice cracking. "You speak of honesty when you do not understand the first thing about loyalty, about duty." I kept my pistol trained on him, though my hand trembled slightly. Coldwell's face, usually composed in gentle dignity, was contorted with anguish and desperation. Holmes moved one cautious step forward. "Then enlighten us." What duty compels you to abduct your own nephew? To threaten his life? Coldwell's breath steamed in the cold air as his arm wavered between us. I never wished to harm him, he said hoarsely. But the boy discovered something he had no right to know. Holmes's voice was soft. The family ledgers. Coldwell flinched. You did see them. I saw enough, Holmes replied. A series of irregular withdrawals, a missing trust fund, money meant for Charles and his sister. Coldwell's eyes hardened. Money that saved the entire estate. Do you think the Whitford name would still be standing if not for me? I kept them afloat after his father died. I protected them. You stole from them, Holmes said. No! Coldwell's shout echoed off the stone. I borrowed what was needed. I meant to return every shilling. But Charles, curious, persistent boy, he began looking too closely. Far too closely. Charles spoke then, his voice faint. You could have told us. Uncle Albert, you could have explained. Coldwell turned on him with wild eyes. And let you think me a thief? A fraud? No, I raised you as if you were my own children. I gave everything so that you might never feel the ruin that stalked our family. Holmes interjected calmly. Yet when Charles confronted you, he threatened to expose me, Coldwell whispered. Said he would go to the solicitor, said he'd tell his sister. I begged him to understand, but he would not listen. Holmes gestured quietly for me to loosen my stance. He sensed the unraveling thread of Coldwell's resistance. So instead of confession, you chose subterfuge, Holmes said. You frightened him with anonymous messages. You watched him in secret. And when he fled the estate last night, you followed him into the storm. Coldwell pressed a shaking hand to his forehead. I only needed time to set things right. But he ran from the house in terror of me, and I could not allow him to vanish before I explained. Holmes stepped closer. Yet you bound him, struck him, silenced him. Coldwell's voice broke. I panicked. When he tried to flee again, I only meant to stop him. The revolver trembled in his grip. The man was collapsing under the weight of his own conscience. Holmes held out a steady hand. Albert Coldwell, listen to me. All is not lost. The law is harsh, but it allows mercy for those who repent before true harm is done. The boy is alive. No life has been taken, but if you fire that weapon, if you commit a crime that cannot be undone, then all chance of redemption ends tonight. Coldwell's eyes flickered toward Charles. The young man's face, white, exhausted, held not hatred but sorrow. Uncle, Charles whispered, please let us go home. Coldwell shuddered. The revolver dipped an inch. 2. Holmes watched like a hawk, breathless but poised. I dared not move. A long, agonizing silence filled the shelter, broken only by the wind rattling the ruined shutters. At last, with a fragile, strangled sound, Coldwell's fingers loosened. The revolver slipped from his grasp and clattered onto the stone floor. Holmes moved instantly, securing the weapon and guiding Coldwell to a seat as the man crumpled, burying his face in his hands. It is over, Holmes murmured. You have chosen the wiser path. Coldwell sobbed quietly, his defiance spent. I hurried to Charles, cutting the rope from his wrists. He winced as he stood, swaying with weakness. You're safe now, I told him gently. It's finished. He gave a faint, grateful nod, leaning against me for support. Coldwell looked up at him, eyes shining with grief. Charles, I never wished. I only meant to protect. But Charles shook his head slowly. Uncle, protection is not deception. You should have trusted us. Holmes rested a hand on Coldwell's shoulder. You will have opportunity to explain yourself, properly, before the authorities and before the family. Truth, no matter how painful, is always kinder than fear. Coldwell closed his eyes. For a moment there was only silence. Holmes turned to me. "Watson, tend to the boy. We must escort both men back to the estate before the storm worsens. Hargreaves will send for Inspector Kellaway. I fear he shall have much to answer." The journey back through the snow was slow and heavy, but the storm had lost some of its fury. As though the night itself, sensing justice had begun its work, was letting out a long-held breath. Charles leaned on me as we walked, Holmes helping Coldwell ahead of us. The older man was silent now, a figure of tragedy rather than malice. Holmes glanced back at me once, speaking low so only I could hear. "Observe, Watson. Guilt does not always wear the face of villainy. Sometimes it is carved upon the countenance of a man who loved too fiercely, feared too deeply, and strayed too far." "And Charles?" I asked. Holmes looked toward the young man gently. "He has survived betrayal. That is no small ordeal. But the truth shall be his remedy. And Miss Whitford," Holmes sighed, "her heart will be the one to suffer most." As the torches of Whitford House finally glimmered through the snow, I felt the weight of the night settle upon my shoulders. Coldwell's crime had been unveiled. Charles was safe. But the case was not yet closed. Holmes's face, illuminated faintly by the lantern, showed that he was already turning over another question. Another thread to unravel. Something still eluded him. Something that would emerge in the final act. Chapter 10. The Final Deduction. We returned to Whitford House in the early hours of the morning, the storm finally abating into a gentle, icy drizzle. The snow lay in thick drifts along the gardens and walkways, muffling our footsteps and giving the world an almost reverent stillness. Holmes, as always, moved with a restless energy, checking every step, every shadow, as if the storm itself might have hidden one final secret. Charles, exhausted but relieved, walked between me and Holmes, leaning lightly upon my arm. Coldwell, silent and subdued, followed, his shoulders stooped as though the weight of the past night had physically bent him. Inside the house, the fire in the main drawing room had been rekindled, and Miss Whitford was waiting, her eyes wide with concern and apprehension. She rushed forward at our entry, embracing her brother with tears streaking her cheeks. "Charles, you're safe," she exclaimed, her voice trembling. He hugged her back weakly. "I'm here, sister." "Thanks to them," he whispered, nodding toward Holmes and me. Holmes remained quiet, observing the reunion with his customary detachment. Yet there was a faint softness in his eyes, rare and almost imperceptible. Once Charles and Miss Whitford had seated themselves, Holmes turned to Coldwell, who was sitting stiffly on the edge of a chair, his head bowed in shame. "Mr. Coldwell," Holmes said quietly, "your actions were misguided, though your intentions were, at least in part, honorable. You feared the disclosure of your financial interventions, yet in your zeal to protect the Whitford legacy, you nearly destroyed the very lives you aimed to preserve." Coldwell nodded, swallowing hard. I see that now. I thought I was saving them from ruin, but I was only binding them with fear." Holmes's gaze was unyielding. "Indeed, yet there is more to understand here, more that demands clarity before the law takes its course." He turned to the group, hands clasped behind him, pacing slowly as he began to reconstruct the chain of events. Charles received a note hidden within the locket, warning him of surveillance. That note was the spark that led him to confront Miss Fairchild and subsequently leave the lodge. Yet he did not know the author of the note. A piece of misdirection intended by you, Coldwell, to gauge his reaction without revealing your hand. Holmes paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "You underestimated Charles's intelligence and courage." Coldwell's eyes widened. I thought only to protect him from financial ruin, from scandal." Holmes nodded. "And in doing so, you created a chain of fear and misunderstanding. That note, coupled with your secret nightly visits to the lodge, made Charles believe he was threatened by unknown forces. He fled, you followed, and in the confusion of the storm, you lost control of the situation. That is why he was left in the snowbound woods, temporarily at your mercy. Miss Whitford gasped. Then everything he feared was because of my uncle? Holmes's expression softened slightly. Not entirely. Fear, once planted, takes on a life of its own. But your uncle's actions were the catalyst. He turned toward Charles. Now consider Miss Fairchild's role. She entered the lodge in good faith, hoping only to reclaim the locket and perhaps speak with you. She did not intend to harm or frighten you, yet her presence added another layer of confusion which Coldwell exploited, or rather failed to anticipate. Charles frowned, processing Holmes's words. So, she wasn't involved in all of this? Holmes shook his head. No. Miss Fairchild acted from loyalty and concern. It is, in fact, your uncle whose intentions were misaligned with prudence. Coldwell's voice quavered. I see it clearly now. The chaos, the near disaster, it was my doing. Holmes continued, his gaze shifting toward me. And as for the caretaker, Hargreaves, he provided key observations. He heard voices, saw lanterns moving in the woods, yet withheld certain details out of misplaced loyalty and fear of reprisal. His actions, though understandable, allowed the situation to escalate. Hargreaves lowered his head, muttering an apology. I only wanted to serve faithfully. Holmes inclined his head. You did. But fidelity without discernment can be dangerous. He straightened and moved toward the center of the room, his hands now clasped in front, voice resonant. Let us summarize the chain of reasoning that brought us to the resolution. Charles Whitford, acting upon a warning note, fled the lodge. Miss Fairchild attempted to assist retrieving the locket. Coldwell, fearing exposure, pursued Charles into the storm, intent upon control. The boy was not harmed physically, but psychologically imperiled by mistrust and confusion. The caretaker observed, but did not intervene decisively. And finally, the snow itself concealed footprints, tracks, and evidence until carefully analyzed. Charles sat forward, eyes brightening with realization. So, Holmes, you knew where I was the whole time? Holmes inclined his head. I followed the trail of logic and of footprints combined with reports from Hargreaves and the known behavior patterns of those involved. The snow preserved evidence that, if read correctly, reveals all. Each step, each misdirection, each moment of panic or fear. Nothing escapes observation. Miss Whitford clasped her hands. Holmes, you saved my brother. I can never thank you enough. Holmes's lips curved faintly. It is my profession, Miss Whitford, and the satisfaction of seeing reason restored to chaos is reward enough, I interjected, as I often did when the emotions of the moment threatened to overwhelm. Holmes. What of Coldwell? Will he face the law? Holmes regarded him with the keen precision of a surgeon examining a patient. Justice must be served, Watson, but mercy can temper the severity of consequence. Coldwell's motives were misguided but not malevolent. He will account for his actions, but the family may choose leniency now that the truth is revealed. Coldwell exhaled shakily, relief and shame warring across his features. I will make amends. Holmes nodded. Good. Let that be your first step. He turned once more toward the group, his voice softening with a rare touch of reflection. The moral of this tale is perhaps that fear and secrecy are far more dangerous than any external threat. Misplaced loyalty, when combined with deception, can imperil even the most cherished relationships. Yet reason, observation, and courage can unravel the most intricate of misfortunes. Miss Whitford's eyes glimmered with gratitude. I will remember that, Mr. Holmes. Holmes inclined his head. As will you, Miss Whitford. And Charles, too. You have survived a trial not merely of the body, but of trust and perception. I glanced around at the gathered faces, the relief on Charles and his sister, the contrition on Coldwell, the nervous pride of Hargreaves. I felt a quiet admiration for Holmes, who had once again navigated the labyrinth of human motives and misdirection with surgical precision. He turned to me finally. Watson, the snow preserves the footprints of truth if one knows how to read them. But the heart, that is more elusive. It takes patience, empathy, and unwavering attention to discern the intentions concealed within. I nodded. And the reward is the restoration of order. Holmes's gaze softened. Exactly. And perhaps for once even those who erred can be guided back toward it. The first hints of dawn touched the horizon, pale and pink, spilling into the drawing room. The storm had passed. The snow sparkled like a blanket of diamonds. Outside, London was awakening, unaware of the trials and revelations that had unfolded within the Whitford estate. Holmes walked to the window, looking down at the quiet landscape. "Let this be a lesson, Watson," he murmured, "that vigilance, reason, and moral clarity must always guide action. For the world is fraught with peril, both visible and hidden." I followed his gaze, feeling the truth of his words resonate with the quiet majesty of the snowbound world. All had been revealed. All had been set right. And yet, as always, I sensed that the mind of Sherlock Holmes was already turning to the next mystery, unseen but inexorably drawing him forward. As the light grew stronger, illuminating the pristine snow, I knew that this case, though concluded, would remain etched in memory. A tale of fear, loyalty, misdirection, and ultimately the triumph of reason. Holmes turned to us finally, a faint, approving smile gracing his features. "Now, Watson, Miss Whitford, and Charles, let the warmth of the hearth restore what the night almost stole from you. And remember, truth once pursued with patience and observation always prevails." The family embraced in the firelight. Coldwell sat quietly, chastened but relieved. And I, ever the witness, felt the satisfaction of a stormy night resolved not by chance, but by reason, intellect, and the unerring observation of Sherlock Holmes.